What if Red Dead Redemption had half the budget and time, and then had a baby with Watch Dogs, but in space? That's basically Star Wars Outlaws. A painfully mid-game I really want to like from a studio, massive, I think really cares about Star Wars. Still, I'd say the game isn't a dumpster fire that many online will attempt to smear it as. Because if there's one group of people who really hate Star Wars, it's Star Wars fans. My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to TheAstroPub, your favorite space bar at the end of the galaxy. Ubisoft and Massive gave me an early review copy of the game, which is kind of weird. If I had a nickel every time I got an early review copy of a space game in August, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird that it happened twice, in 2 years even. This is a spoiler-free review on the gameplay and general feel of the game. I'll also talk a little bit about the lore of the game and how it fits into the Star Wars universe, because it's one of the few standout additions to the game. The short review is Star Wars Outlaws feels like a different approach to the Ubisoft open world formula, with both a deep love and respect for the Star Wars universe and Massive's own unique touch. The engine shines with the large open spaces, and the game does a lot to build a world that feels lived in. That said, the gameplay is alright at best. The motion capture could have used more budget, and the writing is stilted even by Star Wars standards. Before I begin, here's a bit of a caveat. I played this on the PC with my high mid-range PC, which is aging. Specs on screen now. I have not played the console versions, and from what I can tell, those seem to be in a worse state than the PC release. I also only got a bit past 10 hours into the game by playing it far more casually than grinding the main story. By other estimates, Outlaws is about 30 hours, so there may be some game-breaking and other issues later down the game that I haven't picked up on. To start off, this game was painful to play at start. This tutorial section felt almost like it had a delayed response, like there was input lag when I was on a wired mouse and keyboard. Even the game took a few seconds longer than it felt like it should have to actually notice I was trying to progress. That was already bad, but right off the bat, I was hit with some of the most stilted dialogue with the stiffest motion capture I have seen in a AAA title in years. It's not Mass Effect Andromeda bad, but it looks last gen at best. The story progressed fairly typically. A young, eager outlaw, K-Vess, looking to make a name for herself and get out of the gutter she grew up in, Canto Blight. Only, I've already lied to you, because we don't know that she grew up there until almost the end of the prologue. In fact, I entirely misread the relationship between the bartender at the beginning of the game and Kay, since it's not revealed who he is to her until, again, near the end of the prologue. So I don't know who this person is or why they care as much as they do about Kay, made worse by the fact that the bartender's voice actor sounds like they're either phoning in their line delivery or the director entirely mishandled their talent. Either way, the game starts off on a bad foot and gets worse. I felt like the game was both railroading me to a specific location and destinations while also telling me to explore. It felt like the developers were fighting each other on the direction of this first section, as parts were basically tutorial missions while others felt like well-crafted natural environmental lessons. For instance, the first real mission we are given is to get 100 credits to repair our busted data spike, a lockpicking tool. At that point, it's entirely up to the player how to get this money. There isn't an arrow saying get money here, but instead natural dialogue and datapad hints that, if you followed, would net you credits, or things to sell for credits. It was teaching me that if you listen to the crowd and explore an area for datapads, I could learn stuff that I could use to my advantage, which wouldn't always be written down in my journal to do later, and also tricked me into learning more lore because every time I saw a datapad, I would go for it because I could get more credits, and maybe instead learn a little bit about the universe that I'm in. That being said, there was literally nothing else I could do other than these side activities in this intro portion. It felt like the devs spent a lot of time realizing the slums of Kanto for it to feel almost wasted, since you could only realistically do activities that centered around tutorialization of the mechanics. Even then, the hints and prompts didn't even seem to tell me all about additional things like fast talking and whistling in stealth sections to distract or attract guards from their patrols. I honestly had a hard time really getting through this section because, on top of all of this, the NPCs were fairly easy to deal with, or they felt like they were intentionally placed so you had no choice but to get into a shootout to force you to learn about how the game worked. However, once I got out of this first hour or so of the game and the story really took off, I started to enjoy it a bit more. The first big action sequence ended with a twist which set the stage for what I would expect later in the game, and showed that the writing team loves their Star Wars. And I don't mean likes lightsabers and the Force. I mean loves their Jobin T-85 speeder bikes and Sabacc games. I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to the lore and the universe of Star Wars, but even I'm impressed when there's a reference to the Starlight Beacon of all things of the High Republic, and it's naturally inserted into the story as if it should be there, because the story needs it to be there, and not because the devs wanted to wow the player with their lore trivia. I will admit, my favorite part of the Star Wars universe was always the seedy underbelly where syndicates and pirates battled for control of the Outer Rim like an Old West dime novel series. That is where Outlaws shines. Its characters and story are some of the best parts of Solo, Season 1 of The Mandalorian, and anything to do with Hondo Ohnaka. That is, if you can look past some of the more stilted deliveries and stiff facial animation, which arguably are easier to do with the alien characters. That's not to say the writing is perfect or anything, but it knows the universe it is in and won't talk down to players who don't know this side of Star Wars, but also won't patronize players who do, mostly. Kay is supposed to be a bit of a greenhorn when it comes to the business of being an outlaw outside of her hometown, so it at least makes sense narratively speaking that she is confused about some stuff. This is a personal opinion, but the characters in particular are very sinister and hammy in the best Star Wars way. Everyone knows more than you at the start, and everyone is trying to play each other all the time. Each faction and individual outlaw is looking to get an edge, but not so much that they put their own interests in danger. The reputation system, though easy to game, really does feel like you are making hard decisions when you're given the inevitable option to screw over the syndicate that hired you to do a job, or stick to the plan. You also feel the consequences of those actions far more than you may realize, and it can put you into a bad place at times. For example, at one point I really screwed over the Crimson Dawn to the point that they just did not like me. However, I needed to meet a contact in their territory in order to get some new kit, effectively making a normal mission in any other game just a tad bit harder to even start due to having to slowly stealth my way through Crimson Dawn's territory. This, tied to their very Star Wars grounded storytelling, made me very happy, though it was about 6 hours into the game, when I sat down to play a game of Sabacc as part of a mission, that it finally clicked and I realized I was enjoying myself. And I guess this is a good segue as any to talk about the more mid and bad parts of the game. To get the bad out of the way, first, the AI can be a total mess. They normally aren't very responsive, but can spike to being hyper competent or brain dead, which one seems to be entirely random rather than being some kind of skill-based system. Sometimes they can't tell you're even there when you're right next to them. Other times they literally have X-ray vision and can see you through walls on the other side of a map. At best, it makes for a somewhat challenging system, and at worst, very frustrating. In fairness, I found the spikes up or down in intelligence and awareness to be minimal, and it didn't define my overall experience, but they did tend to rear up at the absolute worst times. Now, let's talk about the painfully mid part of the game. The actual gameplay. Everything from the gunplay to the traversal and even the button layouts is frustratingly serviceable. Just a small example of the weird button layout. It took me embarrassingly long to figure out that you dismount your speeder by holding the R key, and that you roll your ship with Z and C keys. It honestly felt like whoever was doing the button mapping for the game was unfamiliar with vehicles and games and just kinda rolled with what the Force was telling them to do and never bothered to check what other games did with their button layout. It sounds minor, but the odd button layout, combined with the, at times, poor tutorials the game gives for mechanics, can make the game even more frustrating. The gameplay itself is serviceable, but as a somewhat veteran of these kind of games, it felt like they were doing the greatest hits rehash rather than making the game unique to Outlaws itself. Gunplay is fine, stealth is fine, vehicle and space travel are fine, missions are fine. The game is generally fine. It's not outstandingly good or bad, it just is. Honestly, without the well-conceived story and them really leaning into the Star Wars setting, this would be a better than average Ubisoft open world game. It's the unique love of Star Wars and a story that clearly the devs are passionate to tell that makes the game rise above the typical Ubisoft experience. That being said, the stealth and gunplay have more depth when you unlock upgrades for your blaster and get skills and or buffs that can improve your abilities and equipment in general. The issue is that it can take several hours for you to even start to get these upgrades through normal gameplay, and several more to really begin to play with them the way the game seems to want you to. The gameplay and story is a slow burn experience that gets better as time goes by. For instance, when I reached the first planet after the prologue, I realized that Massive was really into the Red Dead series of games. Every part of the world felt like it belonged there with some kind of story to tell. But this was about 3 hours into the game itself. It took me several hours of playing the game to realize what the devs were trying to do. And I don't think it's just because I'm a dumb idiot with a bad brain. This is the most frustrating part about the game as a whole, how it often fights you to play it. I'm not talking about the graphical issues and bugs. I experienced a few of those with only one game-breaking crash, thankfully. Those can be bad and make a painfully average experience worse. No, I'm talking about how the game drags you along, encouraging you to take in the sights and explore, only to take hours before you can even get to the parts that make the game really shine. It was as if the devs built the later parts of the game first, and then tried to guide the player to that point with a decent story and limited gameplay to try to gradually get you to the game they wanted you to play. This is what makes the game hard to pin down for me. The longer I played it, the more fun I had, but I don't know if it's because the devs designed it that way, or I was being Pavloved into seeing mechanics as good because I was forced to play the game over a weekend due to my schedule and the short amount of time I had with it. Outlaws doesn't feel like a Ubisoft game they reskinned Star Wars into. It feels like Massive wanted to make a Star Wars game the way they knew they could. But I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'll leave you with this little anecdote. My initial reaction I shared with my Star Wars superfan of a wife was, it makes me want Star Wars Outlaws 2, to see what Massive can learn from this and improve on. That doesn't feel like a good statement. Yet again, it's clear they really love the universe and were really fully committed to a story they clearly wanted to tell. It's like a game that needed another pass, but had good bones and passion behind it. So, based on my experience, would I suggest you pick up Star Wars Outlaws at launch? No. I wouldn't say it's worth the asking price of 70 USD. It feels like a solid $40 or $50 game being marked up because it has AAA slapped on the box. It's hard to recommend Ubisoft Plus subscription for it either, unless you're really fully committing to the game for the month. Though I don't give review scores, from what other reviews have said, it's a 7 or 8 out of 10, which sounds about right. It's a good, not great game with passion and talent behind it that a really dedicated Star Wars fan would enjoy. Like a solid season of Rebels or Mandalorian in game form. Take that what you will. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to hit the like button to appease the YouTube robot overlords. If you want me to do a more in-depth breakdown of the game, please let me know in the comments below. I'd really like a chance to dig into the game more and fully complete it on my own time to see if it holds up beyond the first third I experienced thus far. Again, thanks for watching. And like I say every time, hope to see you someday in the black.